Alright, so for this video, what I wanted to do was sort of the second part of the sort of modern world history begins in Asia unit. And for this video, we're not necessarily focusing on an area that you would really consider to be in Asia if you were just going to list out the countries that are there. And instead, we're going to focus in a little bit on Russia. And one reason for that is because with Russia, we're going to see the influence of the Mongols, sort of the importance of their expedition into what we now consider to be Russia, and we're also going to look a little bit to the past to see what Russia's doing at this point and how potentially that might play out in the future if we're looking at world history too. So as far as some Russian history basics, a couple of terms, a couple of ideas that I wanted to point out before we get started. So first of all, for Russian history, it's important to understand that this is relatively agricultural. Before you have the rise of the czars, and even after the rise of the czars, for many Russian people, their lives are based around an agricultural homestead. In addition to that, keep in mind that while I am referring to this as Russia, they would not have referred to it as Russia. Instead, at this early point, we can see that what is now Russia was actually many different states. It wasn't just Russia itself. Instead, you have a lot of different states that have emerged. And within those states, there are very few cities. In fact, there's small to no merchant or urban class before the invasion of the Mongols and even afterwards. We can see that for most people who live in this agricultural economy, they are going to be in a status of serfdom for a big period of time. Now, before the Mongols, we can see that really these people are going to be peasants. They might still be limited on their mobility, but they're going to be considered peasants. But after the reign of Ivan the Great and with his following the czars that come after him, we will see that serfdom will emerge. And in that system of serfdom, as I refer to that throughout this lecture, just know that that is going to be forced peasant labor. With serfdom, it's forced peasant labor. They are often exploited. They are mistreated. They are not allowed to leave or to move around freely. They might have restrictions on who they're allowed to marry or what their children are going to do. Basically, their children inherit their status. And that's what you're seeing for a lot of people who live in this region. Now, in contrast to that, you also have another group known as the boyars. These are the elites in what is now Russia. They control very vast estates, oftentimes controlling the serfs who work on these estates. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the history of the Mongols invading in Russia, but suffice it to say that for the Mongols, one reason for their superiority and their ability to conquer Russia is going to be their unity. For the area that is now Russia, they do not have unity. Again, they are independent states. Some of these states are very small. Many of them are going to realize very quickly that they are no match for these Mongols with their forces, riding in on their fierce horses, with their weapons, their fierce ability to conquer, their willingness to kill anything that moves when necessary, to annihilate entire regions. So you see that some of the smaller states might actually even choose to submit to Mongol rule. And in Russia, the way that Mongolian rule would have worked is that they would have been paying a tribute to these Mongols. And in paying this tribute, they are not only recognizing the Mongols as their supreme power, as their rulers, but they also help the Mongols to fund further expeditions. And for the Mongols, as they work their way through Russia, what they do, once they've conquered these states, is they are going to choose a grand prince. And with the grand prince that they choose, he is going to sort of collect these tributes. He is considered to be the head of all of these Russian states. So in that, we can see the Mongols sort of force the Russians to look to one individual as being a grand prince, as being above the other rulers in various regions. So because of that, we can see that eventually, and again, I am very much simplifying this for the sake of an introductory video, you're going to see the rise of Ivan the Great. Now, before you get to Ivan the Great, you are going to see there are two grand princes, Ivan the First and the Second. So his father and grandfather. And under Ivan the First and Second, they grow very wealthy off of their position as the Grand Prince and off of tribute. However, we can also see that they are starting to raise an army. And this army is full of musketeers, as they're referred to. They're getting their hands on things like guns, gunpowder. They're learning these new technological advances that the Mongols also brought to their doors. And they are also continuing to sort of unite these Russian cities, these various states. And in doing so, what happens is that they are prepared to throw off the Mongols at the first chance. Now, that chance might not come for Ivan I or II, but under Ivan III, who will later become known as Ivan the Great, in 1480, he declares Russia to be independent from Mongol rule. And with this, he is going to acquire all Russian-speaking lands under Muscovy, and they're going to basically start to incorporate more cities and more states. With this, there are some groups that are not going to be directly linked in with Ivan the Great and the land of the Rus that they are creating here. So, for example, you're going to have the Cossacks, and they are going to be free peasants. They are not serfs, and they settle on a lot of newly conquered lands. They are basically recruited to serve as cavalry to help fight against nomads, but they're also Orthodox. So a very interesting group of people, but again, not everybody continues to be part of what will become Russia. They're kind of more of a secondary group of people that is helping to defend that frontier region. Now, under Ivan the Great, we can see that he is going to basically create what becomes known as the Third Rome. Now, that's a contested term. For a lot of people living in Russia in the latter part of the 1400s and into the 1500s, they believe very heavily that this is the Third Rome. So what exactly does that mean? Well, the first Rome would have been Rome. But keep in mind, and I have a video on this I can try to throw in if that would be helpful. I'll try to put that in the cards. But keep in mind that with Rome, what ends up happening is that they are going to fall to groups of Vandals. They start to fracture within themselves, and over time it is going to collapse. But it's not necessarily the fall of Rome. The second Rome would have been the Byzantine Empire. So when Rome splits in half and creates an eastern and a western portion, the eastern portion thrives for many years. However, it is eventually conquered by the Ottoman Turks, and I should have a video coming out on that pretty soon. And when the Byzantine Empire is conquered, it is believed by many people who were living in what will become Russia that they are now the defenders of the Christian faith for Europe as well as the rest of the world. So under Ivan, what we can see is that he is going to create the city of Moscow in the 16th century. It'll finally get its name, but we do see that what he does is he creates a large city. He has a more centralized government. A lot of what they do is very much modeled after the Byzantine Empire. They are also going to practice Orthodox Christianity, which they have been for a while. Under Ivan, he is going to end up marrying the daughter of the last Byzantine emperor, and he also refers to himself as a Tsar, T-S-A-R. And this is going to be after the Greek title of Caesar, further connecting themselves as this Third Rome. Now, for Russians, they really see themselves as God's successors to Rome and to Constantinople. Now, under Ivan the Great, again, you do see a solidification of the system of serfdom, but Ivan the Great, while often talked about and very important for pushing the Mongols out, another Ivan that you've probably heard quite a bit about is going to come years later under Ivan the Terrible. Now, for Ivan the Terrible, he is born in 1530. His father really wanted an heir, and he had been unable to have a child, so what he did was he divorced his wife and remarried. Now, many religious leaders, thinking about this time in 1530, they believed that this was sinful, that when you married for life, regardless of the types of children you had or those types of circumstances. So with this, since he did divorce his wife, many of these religious leaders predicted that Ivan would be evil. However, his father died very early in life. He died when Ivan was only 3, so he became the Tsar of Russia in 1533 at 3 years of age. And for Ivan, his mother became his regent. One thing to keep in mind is that between Ivan the Great and Ivan the Terrible, there were several women who ruled either as regents or in their own right, respectively, over Russia, essentially. So they don't seem to have an issue with women being able to rule as regents. However, the boyars, or again, these elite men and women in Russia, do not like this. So they end up killing his mom, and they take over as regent when Ivan was only 8 years old. So while of course we can look and we can see the start of a very turbulent childhood already, we can also keep in mind that Ivan does make his own decisions, but I do want you to understand who he was in the past. So as far as these boyars, they were terrible to Ivan. He was forced to wear rags. He was sometimes forced to wear a picture of a donkey around his neck. He was mistreated. Of course, we can think of different allegations that could have been thrown around. But regardless, he was very much mistreated. He also had to witness men being skinned alive for crossing certain boyars. By the time he was a young teen, he himself began to torture cats in much the same way that he had seen the boyars torturing their rivals. So for Ivan, he lost his father when he was 3. That's going to be hard on any child. His mother was murdered by the time he was 8. And it's kind of unclear as to what part of that he might have even witnessed. That's very tragic for a kid to lose a parent, let alone both parents, before the age of 10. And then after that, the people who take care of him, they're cruel to him, they're cruel to others, and that's all he knows is cruelty in his childhood. At the age of 13, he ordered his first murder, and he actually had a boyar who had crossed him eaten alive by dogs. At this point, he is going to become the Tsar, and he is going to sort of position himself to be this great Tsar. He believes that he can do what others may not have been able to do. He ends up marrying a woman named Anastasia, and with these reforms that he puts in place, he actually does quite a lot. So largely his reforms were about accountability. Before, people with money could pretty much kill whoever they wanted to. He puts an end to this. He creates the first professional army that is trained and paid. There are going to be laws created that limit the boyars and their influence and power. He also confiscated some of the large estates of boyars that he felt had crossed him and redistributed the land to his supporters. He reshaped the Russian government. He chose his own council, and his advisors were chosen by merit, not based on what family they came from. He also created the assemblies of the land, and these are basically local assemblies that would be able to help communicate laws and also communicate with Ivan about what was taking place. But in 1564, he lost his wife, and his oldest son, Dmitri, and his most trusted religious advisor. We can think that for Ivan, you've got this cruel, terrible childhood. He kind of turns it around. He is going to marry. When he ends up marrying, he's probably very happy. It sounds like he had a decent relationship. He had the son. Now, of course, we don't know what went on behind closed doors, but regardless of all of that, he has things going. They're set in place. Russia, Muscovy, it's expanding. And with that, when he loses all of these people, he's going to have a hard time with it. In the same year, his military leader ends up deflecting. He is also kind of mad and says he's going to abdicate the throne. But the boyars see this as an opportunity. They say they need him to stay in place due to wars and issues. And they also, the boyars that support him, want him to pass laws to give them some of their rights back. He eventually decides to stay, but he is also going to create a mini-state in Muscovy to do whatever he wants. He wants to be considered a god in this mini-state that he creates. So we can already start to see that he is starting to slip back and becoming a little bit more irrational. Now, some other terms that we can kind of point out, and I have these up on the screen that you can look at as well. You are going to have the Oprachina, which is going to cover about a third of the territory. That is going to be his area in particular. And then he also creates the Operniki, and this is his private secret police force. With the Operniki, they are going to use cruelty to subdue civilian populations. And it was said that 20 people were tortured every day. Many of those people were killed. So that's where he's going to start to get this idea of being Ivan the Terrible. Now, in addition to that, we can see that the Tartars are able to actually come with a huge army, and they burn a lot. They pretty much burn everything but the Kremlin, and they kill a lot of people, so much so that it was said that the river started to flow the opposite direction. I mean, it's a catastrophic event. And with that, he ends up actually blaming the Operniki for this invasion. But people know that a lot of this has to do with Ivan. He's having these internal issues and isn't ruling effectively. He also finds out that the boyars they really favor his son. Again, he's coming a little bit more unhinged. And with that, when the boyars start to favor his son, he becomes terrified. He ends up beating his son's pregnant wife, who actually ends up miscarrying her child. And his son basically comes to his quarters and he wants to discuss the issue. Of course he does. His father just beat his pregnant wife to the point that she miscarried. And I imagine for his son that there's probably this idea like, this is my father and I am very, very mad. But I also wonder if there was some level of concern there, because his father he's losing it at this point. And he loses it even further. After that, he actually beats his son until he is dead. And he did seem very remorseful over this. But his only son left that he has is going to be Theodore. And Theodore is not a very good choice to take the throne after Ivan's death. But here, I think this gives a really good insight into what Russian society looks like at this point. These boyars, they run so much. I mean, they literally ruined Ivan, who could have potentially grown up with his mother and been just a very normal person. But instead, they murdered his mother and then turned around, treated him like dirt, made him watch them as they tortured people. And in his life, he tried to turn it around, but with the next series of unfortunate events, he is going to end up sort of losing it, sort of breaking away with himself. Now, we're going to fast forward quite a bit at this point. I want us to next start in and look at the Romanov dynasty. I think this is one that a lot of people are familiar with, and again, just going to give a basic overview here. Now, as far as the Romanov dynasty, it is going to really start under Peter I in 1682, and the Romanovs are going to rule over Russia until the end of World War I and the massacre of the Romanov family, essentially, when you start to see these changes that take place in Russia, which we'll have a video on later. Now, for Peter I, he is often referred to as Peter the Great. He ruled from 1682 until 1725. He was very fascinated with new technology that he found in foreign corners of Moscow. Because of this, we can see that there is going to be a process of rapid modernization under Peter I. So first and foremost, we can see the Russian industries, they incorporate the most advanced science and technology that they can. You see that Russian citizens are sent to study abroad at some of the best universities in the world. Peter himself even traveled to Europe to study. So we see Russia, they're branching out. They're bringing in some of the modernity, some reforms. And it seems to be going relatively well for them. We also can see Peter as being progressive, but he's also still an autocrat. There are some military reforms. He wants to build a powerful modern army. He offers better pay and modern weapons to peasants as well. Aristocratic officers ordered to study mathematics and geometry, and built the largest European navy They were able to defeat Sweden in the Great Northern War between 1700 and 1722. This is going to sort of put an end to the Swedish presence in places like Kiev. In addition to that, we can see that there are bureaucratic reforms to facilitate things like the collection of taxes. With this, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything's great. Only nobles are educated to serve as government officials. If you are a serf, a peasant, if you will not have the ability to obtain an education that will help to propel you forward. As far as that goes, you can see that the solidification of the class system continues. But he does create some new noble families based on their service and their loyalty, which gives people hope and makes them definitely want to serve well. We can see some social reforms. With these social reforms, he does things like abolishing the seclusion of women. He actually encourages the mixing of the sexes, which is unheard of at this point for Russia because, again, they are very much stuck in the past up until Peter the First or Peter the Great. He also orders his subjects to start wearing Western-style clothing, and he orders men to shave their beards. Again, St. Petersburg is going to be the new capital. It is also going to be their window to the west. So you can see there that with that, it's going to be on the Baltic Sea. So that's where they're going to have their navy as well as their administrative center. Now, we're going to move just a hair ahead, just in case you wanted some more information. This is something we will come back to a bit later on, but I think it's also important to throw in here that you do have female rulers that are in Russia at this point. Now, again, like I said, we will have future videos that will cover this, but you do see that Catherine the Great will become a czar. And in addition to that, not only will you have Catherine the Great who becomes a Tsar, but you are also going to have Anna and Elizabeth. They are also going to become Tsars. And so with that, I guess I kind of want to finish this out, go ahead and cut this one off. But keep in mind for Russia that they are going to mainly be impacted here into cohesion because of this Mongol invasion. It's a theme that kind of comes up in history, these like massive movements of people or certain individuals or certain events that really changed world history. And arguably we can say that the Mongol conquest, for the Mongols creating their massive empire, as you can see just in this map right here, they changed so much in world history. People have argued that it's because of the Mongols and their conquest of Russia that it started to unify, and instead of being so many individual states, it became much more centralized. We can also think about their impact on world trade. Some people have pointed to the expansion of the Silk Road and the fact that Italian city-states dominated trade into Europe at that point. They can point to that, and they can use that as a way to say, hey, the Mongols and their expansion of trade, the access of Europeans to these goods, that definitely helped as far as spurring on exploration. But with all of that, that's just one of those important moments to keep in mind. Just to recap, you've got men like Ivan the Great. We spent a lot of time detailing the life of Ivan the Terrible and, of course, the Romanov dynasty. So where we're leaving Russia at this point in the course is that we are going to leave Russia at a point where it is building, it is modernizing, and it is westernizing. The next time we come back to look at Russia, we will look a little bit at Catherine the Great. We will talk about their foreign policy relationship, and then we will also look at other events that start to take place. We'll look at the role of Russia just in world history as a whole.